So I've been observing this emulation handheld scene as it's definitely evolved quite a bit over the last couple of years, and it seems like a new one is popping up almost every other week, so it is kind of hard to keep up with it, but I figured it was finally time to take a look at one of the better handhelds. So I went around asking different people like Bob Wolf, and I checked in with RGT, or the Emulation King as apparently he goes by now, and the one that kept coming back to me, and I also saw this one getting thrown around online as a better solution for emulating these games on the go, was the Miyoo Mini Plus. And recently, I did pick one up right here, and I figured today we would take a look at it. Of course, I'd give some of my thoughts and open it up. So if you guys enjoy this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you're new. The Miyoo Mini Plus came out earlier this year at a price of $70, but it seems common to find this thing on places like Amazon bundled together with other accessories for about $80. And when this system first came out, it sold out very, very quickly, and then it was actually being resold for even more than that. So I guess stock has been caught up here at this point, but it is the larger version of the Miyoo Mini. This one, though, with an emphasis on the screen and a bit more real estate for the face buttons and that D-pad. I did opt for the atomic purple, but there are other color combinations you can pick from. I've noticed that black seems to be very popular online. The layout on the front, as you can see, it's pretty straightforward. There's a D-pad on the left, 4 face buttons with typical A, B, X, Y setup, start, select, and then a menu button. Now, around the back, there are 4 buttons, and it's pretty much to cover any of your shoulder buttons with L, R, L2, R2, and it's in like this stair step orientation. And from my experience with it so far, it's just at least made it a bit easier to tell when I'm pressing L or L2 or anything like that. Around the side, you do have a volume rocker, and then at the top, a power button, along with this LED that just always seems to stay on. Some people online have discussed opening it up and disabling the light, whether it's ripping it out completely or just putting some tape over it. I have noticed that light can be extremely bright in, say, dark rooms, so I can see how it would be annoying to have to deal with all the time. Now, the screen, when you're looking at this system, it's half of it. I mean, really, it's front and center, and it's also covered by this piece of glass that adds a bit of a extra premium feel on top of it, which certainly contrasts the cheaper plastic that surrounds it on the system. But technically, this is what you'll be focused on the whole time, so it makes sense that that's where they'd be putting a lot of the money into. I mean, overall, the system, it feels nice enough to hold, but it can get cramped, especially when you're playing, say, a PS1 or a Game Boy Advance game that's calling for use of those shoulder buttons a lot. Let's actually take a minute here to go over some of the specifications, since I feel like it tells the story as to what you should expect out of it. Now, inside, it has an ARM Cortex-A7 dual-core processor clocked in at 1.2 gigahertz. The screen is 3.5 inches diagonal to diagonal. It's an IPS display at 640 by 480, and it's equipped with 128 megabytes of RAM, which means you're pretty much playing everything up until the PlayStation 1. You're not doing Nintendo 64 or GameCube or PS2 or anything like that. But you know what? Thinking about it, I see that a lot with these different emulation handhelds where they tell you they play every single system under the sun, but really they only play a couple of them well, and the other ones run terribly, but technically they run so they can advertise it. I'd kind of prefer a system like this coming in at this price point to just focus in on what it's good at, make the layout so it's better to control with, and then put the money into something like a screen that centers around that 640 by 480 resolution for things like the Game Boy Advance, the Super Nintendo, the PlayStation 1, and so on. There is a slot at the bottom where you can drop an SD card in. That's where, of course, your games will be living. And you also have a USB-C charging port. And you know what? I'm pretty happy to see that basically all of these different emulation handhelds are just using USB-C now. So now let's talk about just some of my experiences playing games on the Miyoo Mini Plus. For the most part, I've been pretty impressed with it when it comes to things like PlayStation 1 and even Game Boy Advance. Game Boy Advance, it's gotten easier and easier, obviously, but with these kind of specifications, I was unsure how well it would play, but for the most part, It's pretty good. I mean, really, I'm going through different titles for like F-Zero, Metroid Fusion. On the PS1 side, I'm firing up all kinds of stuff, including Xenogears, Wipeout, Gran Turismo, Metal Gear Solid, and it worked well enough. You do have like a frame rate counter you can bring up, and I would see it bounce around in the mid-50s to 60 FPS mark, but it wasn't any frame rate drops that were substantial enough to ruin any of the experiences. And the screen in motion looks amazing. It's important to note, though, PS1 games that would be using the dual analog setup for that DualShock controller, they're not going to function here, so just consider that when you pick something like this up and wanting to play through some of those PS1 games. This would be a system you would use to play some of the earlier PS1 games before they got away from just using that D-pad exclusively. Fortunately, that means that a lot of those RPGs during what was a legendary era work really well here. And if you load up the custom OS that is basically being community driven at this point, the Onion OS, it works really well to switch between different games. You press the home button, you can go into a menu, and it will have these different save states set. So if you want to, say, go from Xenogears to Wipeout, or even change systems completely and go to Mega Man X3 on the Super Nintendo, you can do that. It'll launch the ROM and then also launch the save state that you've made, and it's all pretty quick. For a while, the Onion OS was kind of on hold in this weird beta phase where it wasn't necessarily using Wi-Fi correctly in this device. Now, though, it appears they have the full release for it. It leverages Wi-Fi, which the system does have, so it can do over-the-air updates, or, get this, it'll load up achievements through RetroArch. It's just a really fun experience to go through any of these older games and have something pop up that said, oh yeah, you earned this achievement. So while some of them load up with 100 some odd achievements, it's fun to at least take a look at them and maybe go back and do some of those older challenges that you tell everyone you did back when you were little. Now you can prove it. Battery life on the system, it's not amazing. It's also not terrible. I feel like it's on average right around the 4 to 5 hour mark, and this is with a 3,000 milliamp hour battery. And throughout, for example, an entire day, even with heavy use, I was able to get to the end of the day with like 15 or 20% charge left. So it's going to be something that you're not necessarily going to go multiple days without charging. So just keep that in mind. Some of the big drawbacks for this system, at least at this time, is probably the screen being so front and center. Does concern me, because if this thing drops on like a hard floor or something, the screen's probably the first part that's going to hit and most likely will crack. I would immediately get a case, a screen protector, and then I would still baby it completely. And otherwise, probably that LED on the top that's kind of annoying, but I guess in the custom OS that's still being community driven, maybe they come up with a way to have that be turned off in the options menu. And then really it being cramped in certain titles on the PS1 and the Game Boy Advance. Otherwise, I mean, I see why so many people are buying and even discussing this handheld. I mean, it has its own subreddit, and people really seem to be getting a kick out of it. And for the price, with what you get and the screen, it makes sense. But of course, I wanted to take a look in here a bit more and open it up and see what's going on inside the Miyoo Mini Plus. And immediately there's a battery door that is very frustrating to get off. I mean, it's like clamped down, so you might even break a fingernail trying to get this out. And then when you do, you'll notice that the battery is kind of specialized. It's not one that's going to be easily replaceable. In fact, they've branded it essentially, and it has a plug that then runs down to the board. Fortunately, it's not soldered. I just don't know if you're going to be out there buying these batteries up all over the place, but I will admit, with the price of these Mini Pluses, I kind of feel like they are bordering on the edge of being disposable for people now that they are just kind of available out there on Amazon, Prime shipped. But nonetheless, when you do get that battery out, we have some Phillips head screws to remove, as well as a couple of clips. And I think this is a good move for this system to have these clips there to, again, make it feel more solid, more like one piece, especially with the glass screen and all of this at the top there. But once that comes off, we do have 2 more screws to remove, and the entire board comes out. Now, the board is all one piece, and this can be both good and bad. It can be good because it adds support, again, for a system that is smaller but also has cheaper plastic around it. And when you then look underneath of the board, you'll see that they have some of that plastic running up even behind the screen, once again, just to add some sort of support. But the drawback here is if something breaks, again, the board is going to have solder work done to it. You're not getting any kind of modularity out of it, even for the charge port or the SD card slot, the headphone jack. These are all things that will need more specialized repairs if you are really, really wanting to keep your system alive after some weird thing happens to it and it breaks. They did place the antenna in a good spot. It's at the top. It's nowhere near where you may be covering up with your hands. We can see our two main chips here with obviously the ARM chip dead center. There's no kind of cooling or anything, a heat sink or active cooling in this with a fan. It's kind of unnecessary with this low-powered ARM A7 chip. I guess cooling mods could be done if people, I don't know, are overclocking this or something. It is kind of set up to basically support up to the PS1 either way, and from my experiences, it's played those well enough, so I don't even know how like necessary overclocking or anything like that would be. But again, the big thing is still that screen. And something I noticed just very quickly when I was playing around with it, the adhesive around where that glass is, especially in a corner, was kind of coming up as I was flexing the shell. So keep an eye on that if you have one of these up in that corner, just to see if there's any kind of gap that starts to form over time. I will give them credit on the D-pad. It has like a really, really nice point there in the center, nice pivot point, and it's felt great the entire way, like using it for fighters or anything like that for specific button inputs. It hasn't skipped a beat. So yeah, good D-pad there. The A, B, X, and Y, they're kind of loud. They have that clicky sound to them, even though they are rubber membrane presses, but those have also been very responsive. And for the rumble motor that provides some feedback when you say press the menu button and the speaker, those are both held on by pressure with different points being in contact on the board. Overall, it does remind me of a cheaper setup inside with all one board, everything soldered to it, pressure mounted pieces for the rumble motor and stuff, but it's a cheaper product. I mean, they're trying to get this thing under not only $100, but even under like $80 down to $70, and it kind of reflects it in the way it's set up. But I think overall, looking at the Miyoo Mini Plus, they put the money in the correct spots. And this is something that I do agree with from their standpoint. Figure out what consoles you want to support and then try to do it well. So in this case, up to PlayStation, and it makes sense looking at the screen with the aspect ratio and the button layouts for Super Nintendo, Nintendo, Game Boy Advance, PlayStation, Genesis, Neo Geo. It does that well with what they've provided here, and the screen is certainly the star of the show, and again, where a lot of the money went. So in this instance, especially with the community rallying behind this thing and providing extra features with achievements, over-the-air updates, game switcher, and it seems to be building from there. Yeah, this is a pretty easy recommendation at the $70 to $80 mark. Just, of course, make sure you have the correct expectations going into this. You're not looking to play some of the more advanced emulators out there like GameCube or PS2, but if you go into this thinking, okay, this is a really good Game Boy Advance, PlayStation 1 type system, then you're going to get a kick out of it. But let me know what you guys think about the Miyoo Mini Plus down below, especially for someone who owns one now, had picked one up prior. What have your experiences been over the course of a couple of months? Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.